All right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to Variation and Dissertation Writing in the Applied Science Fields, a work in progress. Sharing this presentation with you is Febriana Lestari from Iowa State University. My name is John Fudrow, and I'll be your moderator for the next 50 minutes. A quick reminder before you begin, during the presentation portion, you should keep your audio muted, and please feel free to use the Zoom chat tab to ask questions, which will be addressed during the discussion segment. So thank you all for joining us, and I'll turn it over to Febriana.
Thank you, John. So I'm gonna start sharing my screen. Okay. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So my name is Febriana. I'm a PhD student in the Applied Linguistics and Technology program from Iowa State. And this is my dissertation, which is about dissertation. And the title is Variation in the Dissertation Writing Across Applied Science Fields. And I'm going to share some preliminary findings from my dissertation research. So I'm a PhD student myself, and I am writing my own dissertation, and I often ask for some advice from my seniors and also some professors. And I often heard that they told me, hey, a good dissertation is a done dissertation. But this leaves me with a question, what does it mean by the done dissertation in terms of the context and also linguistically? I dive deeper into looking at what the dissertation writing research in the field. And based on what I have researched about this, dissertation is known as one of the complex academic writing genre. It's a lengthy text and it shows the complex scientific research. It demonstrates the highest level of academic literacy and also doctoral level research. It also serves as a gateway for a professional career, and because it demonstrates our disciplinary knowledge. So given this idea about dissertation writing, we know that this academic writing is definitely a high stakes one. But knowing this high stakes dissertation writing, this also leaves me with some more questions. So how are the graduate students prepared to write these texts? Well, we come with a wide range background, disciplinary knowledge, writing skills, but at the end, we need to compose this highly academic literacy genre. So then, what does the training look like in graduate school? Are there any specific courses dedicated to dissertation writing, or are there any other supports that the graduate students receive? So some studies that look at the graduate student writing found that the graduate level courses typically focus on just the disciplinary content, but not on the language. And so the next questions is the dissertation writing today also still the same as it was 20 years ago? And the reason for me to highlight 20 years ago, because most of the studies about dissertation writing, especially in the linguistics field, were conducted 20 years ago. So it indicates that dissertation writing is largely ignored genre and area of research. And most courses usually focus only on research articles writing. And there is this general assumption that research article the same as dissertation. But I think this is a question that needs further empirical evidence to answer. And I'm hoping to be able to answer that through my research. So I carried out the literature review and I found three common groups of studies about dissertation research. Number one is the studies that focus on looking at the rhetorical organizations of dissertation macrostructures. And typically this group of study focuses on small number of texts and there is no follow-up on the linguistic analysis. So they only look at, okay, what are the chapters that certain dissertations have and so on. And the second group of study, this study usually looks at the genre-based moves and steps. So they want to know the specific communicative functions of specific dissertation sections. Let's say in the introduction sections, what is the communicative functions and how the communicative functions are realized using the moves and steps. So it leaves us with some lack of information about dissertation writing holistically, because we only know some sections of the dissertations. And then the third group of study, those studies look at the individual linguistic features. So for example, they look at how the STEM features are used in the abstract section, Or what about the reporting verbs used in some other sections in the dissertations? So overall, we still need to know further about dissertations as a text, because we cannot rely on just one chapter and then call it as a dissertation. And again, as a PhD student myself, I'm curious about what resources that are valuable for us. And some studies found that the published guidelines on the dissertations usually have the gotcha elements in the titles. So the graduate students have this some sources like, oh, I want to write dissertations in 2 semesters. And the question again, okay, now what about the language variations, and what about the disciplinary role, for example, and the variation that may exist? So these published guidelines are useful, but we also need to know further about the discipline-specific writing. And the common facts and gaps. So from that research, in terms of the literature, I found that this research genre is still very limited in scope and its inquiry. And the graduate students are often exposed to dissertation writing relatively late. So yesterday in Christine Terrell's and also Lily Compton's presentation, they mentioned that, oh yeah, there is no specific courses and students are like put in the corn maze. So I guess I could really relate to that analogy. And it's due to there is no, probably a few valuable courses that are specifically designed on dissertation writing. And the content courses do not typically focus on the language. And there is a general assumption that dissertation and research articles are similar. Now, the fact that I carried out from my domain analysis, dissertation writing varies. Then another thing that I observe is that there is no a clear set of guidelines on how to write in terms of the language that represents the disciplinary research practices of the graduate students, and lack of specific guidelines on the disciplinary specific. The existing self-help book do not adequately address the language challenges that the graduate students face. So my research goals, I want to address the linguistic challenge that hopefully will be useful for L2 learners, especially because there are so many international students who have to write the dissertations in English, and this kind of support is highly needed. And through my domain analysis, which I'm going to explain in a little bit, it will be used to motivate the corpus-based study that consider the characteristics of the data. So we call it the principles of representativeness for corpus. And I would like to address some of the methodological challenge, for example, like lack of conceptualizations for the framework that the previous studies used to code the types of dissertation based on their structures. And this research is also expected to motivate the pedagogical implications for research-based dissertation writing that accounts for disciplinary variation. So the goal of my talk, I would like to identify the variation in the dissertation writing across applied science fields, and this will be divided into looking at the situational and textual characteristics across disciplines and the linguistic patterns within and across disciplines. And these are my 2 research questions. The first research questions, I focus on looking at the situational and textual characteristics, and the result of this analysis will inform my corpus design and building. And the second research questions, I will look at the linguistic variation in the dissertation writing across applied science fields, and then connect the functional interpretations of the linguistic variation to the first research question. So based on that motivation, I am using the text linguistics approach to register variation. So the text linguistic approach to register variation is rooted on the register variation, which is there are 3 components. So this approach has or looks at the situational context, and then the frequent and pervasive linguistic features, and how the situational context and the linguistic feature would go hand in hand to reveal certain communicative functions in the language used. used in the writing. And something that I would like to highlight about this approach is the observation of my analysis is not at the register level or the data level, but the more fine grain that is at the individual text level. So the underlying notion of this approach is that strong co-occurrence patterns of linguistic features mark underlying functional functions, and features do not randomly just co-occur in text. There should be something that motivates the co-occurrence of those features either situationally and or linguistically. Now the methods that I used, there are 3 stages in my study. The first stage is the analysis of situational and textual characteristics, which I included the domain analysis and the development of framework to develop the framework for the situational and textual characteristics analysis. And then I developed my own data, so that is corpus design and building, which expands the previous studies that only focus on a small number of texts. And the third stage, I did the linguistic analysis and functional interpretation. But for my pilot study, I only limited the linguistic analysis on one subdiscipline, that is applied linguistics. So the goal of the domain analysis is to learn about my target language. The target language here is the dissertation writing across applied sciences, and I look at one institution and some steps to do the domain analysis. I collected and reviewed information from the university website. I had a communication with some professors across fields. I reviewed the departmental websites across field, and I also synthesized the findings about dissertation writing from several previous studies, and I observed the actual dissertation texts in the applied science fields. Then, based on this information, I operationalized my domain. So what do I mean by dissertation writing? And then I sampled the corpus or the data or the text for my situational and textual analysis purpose. And the highlight for my domain analysis is that even under one university that share same institutional rules, the dissertation writing varies. And the existing macrostructure framework, so commonly dissertations are coded or divided into traditional and article-based. And previous studies look at some of ways to code them, but in my domain analysis, I found out that the existing framework does not really portray the existing dissertation writing text. And potential variables that characterize the variation motivates the development of the situational and textual characteristics framework. Now, for the situational analysis, I collected 172 dissertation texts, and I coded those number of the number of texts, and in total 43 per discipline. And the reason for me to choose applied linguistics, psychology, engineering, and veterinary medicine is because these disciplines represent the hard applied and the soft applied sciences. And as we could see here, for my linguistic analysis, I only have the data for now for the applied linguistics, and the total number of words that I analyze is 2 million, more than 2 million words. Now, for the analysis of situational and textual characteristics, so the steps is based on my domain analysis, I develop my own framework that I call as situational and textual analysis. And I piloted and revised my framework, and then I coded each dissertation text, so 172 dissertation texts. I annotated for the situational and textual characteristics. And based on my domain analysis, I developed 6 situational characteristics that include, for example, authorship. So I have questions, let's say, to what extent the graduate student becomes the first author in the dissertation writing, or do they serve as the solo author, or do they reflect any collaborations and all that. So I look at the 6 situational characteristics, like the publication time frame. Does this kind of thing apply to my field, for example, or the publication time frame only applies to some other disciplines? Then I also look at the 13 textual characteristics. For example, where is abstract located? How many abstracts does one dissertation text have? And I found some interesting findings based on the codes that I developed for my situational and textual characteristics. And then I conducted the coding process. I analyzed the coding responses qualitatively. So to zoom in, several steps that I did to code my results, I counted the frequency, I counted the percentage, and then I clustered the codes descriptively, because my data consists of both continuous and categorical data. So I initially proposed to have the multidimensional analysis or exploratory factor analysis to understand the situational and textual characteristics, but that statistical analysis was not working for this purpose. And so I did the clustering, the codes qualitatively. I divided the codes into primary, secondary, and sectional descriptors. Then I drew the interpretations based on the coding results. Now, moving on to the third stage, so I skipped the second stage for my corpus building, and this is the third stage in my study. I conducted linguistic analysis, which is additive multidimensional analysis. So multidimensional analysis is basically a multivariate statistic that look at the co-occurrence of linguistic features and then see how those features work together to reveal certain communicative functions. But because currently I only have the subcorpus of applied linguistics dissertation, I could not apply the full MDA, so I conducted the additive MDA. So the additive MDA means adding a new group of texts or plotting a new group of texts into a previous MDA. And this approach allows for comparisons against a range of studies that have also applied the same dimensions to different registers. And in this pilot study, I used the full MDA dimensions from the studies on AJRC corpus, that is the research article writing corpus. And the reason for me to select these studies because the AJRC corpus represents the academic writing on the research register. So some steps for the additive MDA, I selected the MDA model, which is GRACE 2011, and then I chose the dimensions of interest, and I'm going to explain what I mean by dimension here. And then I identify the linguistic features for the dimensions of interest. I calculate the norm occurrence per text in the pilot of my corpus, which is the DRC corpus. I standardize the rate of occurrence of the linguistic features to a z-score, and I computed the dimension score for each text in my corpus, and I compared the results of my corpus to AJRC corpus. So my dissertation compared to the research article writing dimensions. And then I visualized my results using R, and I carried out the functional interpretations. So here is the result for the situational and textual characteristics on the dissertation register corpus. I included 4 disciplines: applied linguistics, psychology, engineering, and vet med. And this is the macrostructure from the previous studies. So the previous studies coded dissertation types into traditional simple, traditional complex, topic-based, manuscript style, and so on. And if we look at the characteristics of the framework, they're pretty simple. So they say, okay, traditional simple dissertations typically reports on a single study. Now, from my domain analysis and my observations of the actual dissertation text, this framework does not really work anymore, because in one dissertation, sometimes it consists of more than one single study, but it also has this structure. So based on that, then I developed my own situational and textual characteristics framework. And here is what I found based on my framework. So I found sub-register number 1, that is monograph, and I have the details, characteristics of the dissertations that belong to monograph sub-registers. For example, commonly it has a solo author, there is departmental disciplinary, or the graduate student just works by him or herself, and the macrostructure or the dissertation looks like a book flow. And then I also have other specific details for the characteristics of the other subregisters. So the second subregister that I found is hybrid monograph. So it kind of has some repetitions for the IMRD in the dissertation. So for example, there is introductions, literature review, study 1, method 1, study 2, method 2, and so forth and so on. And there is also the hybrid article. So this is not fully article-based, but it also reflects the article style dissertation. And subregister 4, that is article-based. So the highlight here is based on my coding of situational and textual characteristics, I found 4 subregisters within one discipline, that is applied linguistics, and it shows that the writing actually varies. And here is the recap of the variation that I found. So if we look at the number, the applied linguistics field is dominated by the monograph dissertation, followed by the hybrid monograph and hybrid article-based and article-based. And then psychology is dominated by monograph dissertation, but it does have the hybrid article-based. So this provides us with an overall idea that disciplines matter, and disciplines may affect the situational characteristics of how graduate students across disciplines write their dissertation. And this is the result, the summary of the result for the 2 sub-big registers that I found. So I have monograph and I have article-based. So for example, how we differentiate monograph and article-based. In terms of the authorship, the article-based, commonly the graduate student does not work by him or herself, but they do some collaborations with the other researchers. While for the publication time frame, the monograph dissertations commonly does not link to any publication, but the article-based dissertation generally tied to publication. So this leaves us with the questions, what is going on in each discipline? Now, here is the trend, as I mentioned earlier, that monograph dissertation occurs a lot in applied linguistics, followed by psychology, and we could see that veterinary medicine is dominated mostly just by the article-based dissertation. Okay, now let's move on to the linguistic analysis. So I'm using the additive multidimensional analysis just on the applied linguistic dissertation subcorpus. So these are the dimensions that I used for my additive MDA. So dimension 1, based on the linguistic analysis in Gray study, the name is academic involvement, elaboration versus informational density. So if we look at that, the language or the communicative functions of language is continuum, put in the continuum. In the positive pole, it has more positive features or more positive linguistic features, and the academic involvement and elaboration indicates that the graduate students write in more of the spoken language rather than in the written language. While in the negative features, it indicates that the graduate students write it with a more informational density, and we can characterize that based on what linguistic features that co-occur together. Now, in dimension 2, the positive pole indicates the contextualized narration, while on the negative pole, it shows the procedural discourse. So the positive features indicate more detailed accounts of events, so they write how the analysis was built, while on the negative feature, they indicate more procedural steps. And dimension 4, human focus on the positive pole, and the negative pole, non-human focus. And that's dimension 3. And dimension 4, more academicy or less academicy. Now, here is the result for dimension 1. We can take a look at the graph over here. So on the left side, this is the result or the subregisters for the academic journal register corpus, while on the right side, that is my dissertation corpus. So if we look at here, the dissertation writing and research article writing, they are not exactly the same, even within the same field. So we could also see here that all of these subregisters of dissertation actually have the positive dimension scores. So that indicate that the dissertation writing in the applied linguistics field are characterized more by the academic involvement and elaboration rather than having the short or more dense information packaged in their language. And how does that look like? So I have the example of the excerpts. And before going to the excerpts, I would like to share a little bit about the linguistic features which make up the positive dimensions and the negative dimensions. So on the positive pole, if you look at over here, there are so many linguistic features. And the idea here is we want to know the co-occurrence of all of these features, and we counted the frequency. So for example, there are uses of verb be or have or causative verbs, plus the model of predictions, model of possibility, and the co-occurrence or the combinations of these linguistic features will tell us about the communicative functions. While on the negative features, they have more of uses of nouns or past tense verbs, prepositions, and so on. And here is an excerpt of the article-based dissertation. So we see there is noun phrases like collection of screencast video, part of a larger study of student use. And there is the prepositional phrases here of screencast video, of a larger study of student use. So more informational density in comparison to the monograph dissertation that are characterized by the uses of past tense verbs like indicated, conducted, and there is the modal verbs like will be. But we also see some agentless passive. So again, the applied linguistic dissertation subregisters lie more on the academic involvement. We write in the way we write, we elaborate our ideas, but we also have some sense of packaging our information using a lot of noun phrases. Now, dimension 2 is different from dimension 1. On the positive pole, again, the dimension is about how we narrate the context when we write. And then on the negative pole, we have the procedural discourse. The highlight here, the article-based dissertation is the only subregister in the dissertation writing that has the negative dimension score. So this indicates that the article-based dissertation is more procedural than the rest of the other subregisters in the applied linguistics field. So some features that make up the positive pole for the narration is the use of the third person pronoun like he, she, it. And then there is some past verbs like an aspectual verbs, communication verbs, and so on. So more sentence level. And then for the negative features, more nouns usage. And the examples of the excerpts. So on the left side, we have the article-based dissertation. So if we look at the language here and we see the features, for example, the instructor comments were de-identified and extracted. That is an example of the agentless passive. And then N comments were extracted and pasted. That is also the agentless passive. Was extracted and sent. So many agentless passive use with the concrete nouns like comments, and comments, feedback files. And this indicates more of the procedures in the research rather than describing a narration. Well, for the monograph dissertation, we see past tense verbs and the that clause. So we kind of get a sense of the differences in terms of the language used by graduate students in the applied linguistics field that wrote the monograph dissertations versus the article-based dissertation. Now, dimension 3, it is human focus versus non-human focus. So for the human focus, if you look at the results over here, all of the dimension scores are positive. So this highlights that the focus of research in applied linguistics is mostly about humans. So for example, about their thinking process, their learning process, and so on. But the article-based dissertations in the applied linguistics has less human focus, because if we connect that to the previous dimension that talks about human and non-human focus or procedural discourse, the article-based dissertation focuses more on the thing rather than on the humans. So these are some of the features that make up dimension 3. For example, pronouns, and then verbs and finite clauses, non-finite clauses. while on the negative features, they usually use attributive adjectives, general adverbs, and prepositions. So we could take a look at the excerpts here. In the article-based, we could see attributive adjectives like in phonetic measures. And then we could see some general adverbs like likely, fully, especially. While in the monograph dissertation, there is the third person pronouns like Diana, and then there is they, Nancy. So we could see the focus of how the language is used. This is the result of dimension 4, academicy and less academicy. And I found that all of the dissertations in the applied linguistics is empirical study, so they indicate more of the academicy style. And I am not exploring dimension 4 quite much because this is very preliminary and I could not find a lot of variations in academicy. And so this will lead us to examples of dimension 4. Okay, so like here in the article base and the monograph, we could see the primary difference, talking about the coding, talking about the feedback, and then we could also see some other evidence here for how the authors actually describes the content of the research. So in general, dimension 4 indicates that all dissertation subregisters in the applied linguistics are academicy. Now, coming up to the discussion, so I found that variation exists within and across disciplines, and the disciplinary variation plays an important role in shaping both the situational and textual characteristics, as well as the patterns of linguistic variation. Monograph and hybrid monograph dissertation shows and share more similar characteristics across dimensions rather than the article-based and hybrid article-based dissertations. So the implication of my research is that dissertation writing and research article writing are distinct. They share some similar characteristics, but they're not exactly the same. And the internal variation within discipline exists. The text linguistic approach to register variation shows more careful analysis and reveals the roles of text in shaping the variation. And my research also implies that the guidelines on dissertation writing need to highlight features that are shaped by disciplinary variation. So for the research, I'm going to continue designing my corpus that represents the subregister of dissertation writing across applied sciences, and I will carry out the full MDA on my corpus instead of the additive MDA. So that's all my presentation today. Thank you. I welcome any question and suggestions and feedback.
Thank you, Febriana. I didn't see any questions in chat, so if anybody has a question, please feel free to indicate that, and I'll ask you to unmute. It was a wonderful presentation. Thank you.
So I have a question about confounding variables. I believe the study is being done at one institution, and I wonder
Yes.
whether you're dealing with the number of faculty in that discipline and whether there's a number of people with the same advisor who are all kind of locked into that advisor's approach to writing, and then other people in the same discipline might have a different approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's actually a very good questions. With the study, the pilot study that I conducted, especially for the situational characteristics, I only look at the authorship in terms of the graduate student's role. But I think looking at the supervisory, that could also reveal why such language might happen. But I could also get a sense of the subdisciplines within the applied linguistics. So, for example, there is an assessment, there is pronunciation focus, there is a corpus-based study, and these dissertations usually are pretty distinct, although they have the same outline of okay, let's write chapter 1 about introduction, chapter 2 literature review, chapter 3 about this. But for example, like in my field in corpus study, there is additional chapter added, and that looks like a separate study, but that's not really a separate study. So for example, like in my domain analysis, like in my presentation, I listed down, I have steps of reviewing websites, collected information and all that. So that does not look like one single study, but the report or the dissertation is written as, okay, let's put this chapter all together, but that's not part of the method. So there has been some distinctions that I could sense in terms of the subdisciplines, but I have not taken a look at the roles of the supervisor within the discipline. So that could be the next steps that I could take a look and add it to the situational analysis for sure.
So
Thank you.
one other
Mhm.
variation in terms of confounding variables could be the funding of the student. If they were working on a single big project, that might be different than if they had multiple different small funding sources for different kind of
Right.
studies.
Yeah, I think I look at that in terms of collaboration, which is very clear, especially in the VetMed versus, let's say, in applied linguistics. So most of the dissertations, although the applied linguistic dissertation also has article base, for example, while the VetMed is dominated by all article base and only three, if I'm not mistaken, wrote in the hybrid article, but under the same sub-register, it's still different. So in terms of the authorship, for example, the article based in applied linguistics is written by just that graduate student. While for the article based in VetMed, there are so many collaborations, and it might be related to the fundings. And if I take a look at different chapters within the dissertations, we could also see how probably one topic of the dissertations written as one of the publishable chapters is either related or not related to the next chapter. But the graduate students also needs to write like one whole narrative at the beginning of the dissertation as an umbrella of the term for the whole studies. Yeah, that will be great additions to look at the situational characteristics further.
Thank you. One other suggestion
Thank you.
is this notion of
Mm.
dimensions and positive and negative. It's not
Mhm.
really intuitive.
Mhm.
That, a dimension would cover a range of things, but why certain things would be considered negative, it seems like a unusual way to describe something.
Yeah. So in the multidimensional analysis, in the corpus field, we counted the frequency of the co-occurrence of the linguistic features. So for example, in one text, out of 2 million words, I will count how many times the past tense verbs occur, and then how many times another feature occur. And then based on that one, we normalized the frequency so that we can have the direct comparability across the data set. And then we counted the dimension score based on the z-score. So we would like to see the variation of certain feature relative to the other features that co-occur in text. And then we have the threshold of looking at, okay, if the feature occurs within this threshold, then we put it as positive. If the feature occurs within certain threshold, then we put it as a negative. So that's how we counted the dimension scores and how we have the positive and the negative. But the positive and the negative here occurs as continuum. So we do not just put all in positive, all in negative. So the texts that have or maybe have the positive dimension score, for example, this means that this text has more of the combinations of the features that belong to that communicative functions. And then the texts that go to the negative pole, it has maybe some of the features in the positive, but not so many, and more features clustered together that indicate all the negative poles. So that's how we calculated the dimension scores and how we did the multidimensional analysis. But in my pilot study, I did not conduct the full MDA, so I did not run my own factorial analysis. So all those dimension scores are based on the calculations of the means and standard deviations of the words and the full MDA study in the research article writing that used AJRC corpus. And the reason for me to do that is because to do the full MDA, I should at least have 300 texts. And for the applied linguistics only, I only have the 43 texts for now. So the number of words probably, I need more number of words and I need more text, because if not, then the variation here maybe does not really show the valid result of that one. So I project the result of the additive MDA for a small number of texts here to a bigger study that has found all of those, and those studies label all of those dimensions. So I just adopted the names of those dimensions based on the co-occurrence of the features for my current pilot study.
Thank you. That helps out.
Thank you.
Two short other comments. The relative comparison you're making with the other corpus is a corpus that is mostly articles. So there may be a bias by comparing against an article corpus when you're having other kind of genre. The other comment is that you might want to look at some of the work on what's called discourse analysis, which is another branch of linguistics that might be relevant. But thank you, very interesting study.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, it looks like we still have about 10 minutes at the end of the session, but so we'll keep an eye out for other questions here. But I want to invite everybody else to either stay around here in the breakout room for the next session, which is understanding copyright ownership for Gen AI generated text and ETDs, or return to the main room for developing policy adjacent language and artificial intelligence use and graduate research at 4:40. But otherwise, we can continue the conversation here and see what else we can talk about. I'm also fascinated to, I guess, and I might have heard it, but not remember it right now when I was thinking about this way. From where are you pulling these dissertations? And is there a comparison between institutions that also becomes a factor in terms of what level they are, what level research institution they might be? And does that continue to have any sort of impact on what you're finding?
Yeah,
that's
actually a very good questions. One of the challenges exploring the dissertation text in terms of the linguistic analysis, and especially for my first research questions, is the first approach relied manually, like on the coding process. So counting 172, and that's kind of laborious work and it takes a lot of time. So for now, I'm just focusing on just one institution, but I think it's pretty promising to see some other institutions to know further. And I think we can make an assumption that a lot more variations will occur in terms of the dissertation writing. And then another thing is dealing with these texts for the linguistic analysis, we should also tag the text using certain software. That's pretty straightforward to do that, but to do the functional interpretations from the situational or contextual characteristics with the linguistic analysis, that could be a kind of way that how we could connect that. So for now, I'm trying to expand the number of observation in like expanding the data in addition to some other previous work that usually the focus of the research only look at, okay, one dissertation text, like, okay, let's look at 10. So I think it's not generalizable, but I would like to expand the analysis using the linguistic approach here. That is a data-driven approach, because we do not have any assumption that, oh, we're going to use a lot of passive in this academic writing, but we let the data to tell us what is actually going on with the writing, and let the numbers actually give us the answers to do that. So I think expanding the institutions would be very beneficial, but I am not sure if I could collect a lot of more data to code for the situational text characteristics. Because, for example, in one questions, I initially proposed continuous data for that one. So I put, like, for example, respond 1, respond 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then from that, I would like to propose the multidimensional analysis or exploratory factor analysis, but for this kind of data. Then when I started doing that, it seems doable, but after coding and refining the framework that I developed, the data is varied. Like, I have categorical data. I could not push it to have all continuous data. So if I have a question, for example, how is the abstract written? Does the dissertations only have one dissertation abstract at the beginning, or does the dissertations have abstract in each article? Then that's not going to give me the continuous variable. So I could not do that in the multivariate statistics for my first research questions. And that kind of like limits the scope of my data explorations for now.
I completely get it. Well, I hope you continue to find good
Thank
resources
you.
and
Yes.
solve some of those problems. Yeah. Anybody else have a question? Otherwise, we have about 4 minutes till a half hour. We're probably okay to end the session at that point. We'll do the
Thank you so
10-second
much.
pause here. Yeah. I'm not seeing activity. So yes, and thank you, Febriana, and wonderful presentation. And everybody, again, we'll have a short break of 10 minutes at 4:30 and reconvene at 4:40. So excellent.